What's in a NAS for a small business? Well, we're going to take a look at the Thecus N8810U-G. You guys said you wanted to see more enterprise stuff, and well, this is enterprise-ish, sort of, kinda. This is the N8810G NAS. It's from Thecus. This is a 2U rack mount server. 2U's just how much space it takes up in the rack. You know, it's sort of a flat rectangular thing. You should know that if you're watching this. And it's got redundant power supplies, 4 gigs of ECC memory, which is good. A Pentium dual core 2.9 gigahertz CPU. This unit has a 2-year warranty, and you bring your own drives. So you have to get sort of nearline or NAS certified drives, or something a little, you know, higher end. If you want to get the proper longevity out of this, you don't necessarily want to use desktop drives, because desktop drives tend to die when they're used for 24/7. Now, at the back of the unit, we can see that it has a redundant power supply. So you've got 2 connections there. It's got VGA and HDMI connections, so there's multimedia applications. We'll look at that more in the software section in a bit. It's got 2 USB 3, 4 USB 2, and 2 Gigabit Ethernet interfaces. It's also got a 10 gig copper Ethernet interface, and that's on a PCI Express card, so that's pretty standard. Now, at the front of the enclosure, it has 8 3.5-inch bays, 2 front USB ports, those are USB 2.0, and it's got some indicator lights, and there's some buttons for controlling the LCD screen. The LCD screen lights up, and you can get some status information and do some basic things from the built-in LCD, which is pretty cool. It's a little disappointing because here, you know, we've seen other 2U units that'll fit 12 drives in the front. Now, that wouldn't leave room for an LCD or buttons or anything like that. But, you know, even with the 1U storage servers that we've been seeing, some vendors have found a way to fit, you know, 12 drives in a 1U server, which is quite a feat. The whole thing pulls out like a drawer, and the drives all sort of flip up. So that's sort of neat to see. So this only has 8 bays. Is a little disappointing, but still the maximum capacity of this thing is 48 gigabytes, so that'd be 6 terabyte drives, you know, a fully loaded configuration. It does support RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 6, RAID 10, RAID 50, and RAID 60. The front bays are lockable, and it comes with 8 keys, 1 for each bay. I didn't check to see if each key was keyed differently, though. That would probably be confusing if it was. You'd never find the right key. This unit, when you buy it, also comes with heavy-duty universal rails. Thanks, Thecus. I really hate it when you get a rack mount server. This is designed to fit only in a rack, and the rails are optional, and they charge you extra, and usually a lot of money, a lot more than they're worth. Thecus has done the right thing here. You get the rails for free. That's awesome. Good job. Well, let's take a closer look under the hood and see what we're working with. So this is the web GUI. It's based on Linux, but you don't have to fool around with the command line if you don't want to. They've included a GUI. The best feature about this NAS is that it's VMware certified. VMware, they're kind of weird. VMware is really popular. You can get the free version. It's used in a lot of small businesses even today. And, you know, this thing is sort of at a weird place. It's not exactly a SAN, but it's not exactly a NAS either. SANs are usually much higher end, much more expensive. You know, they can cost $100,000 or more pretty easily. This thing is a much, much lower price point. It's really a high-end NAS or very low-end SAN. Now, it runs Linux under the hood, and so the disk RAID and the way that it works is actually Linux soft RAID. And so that means if there's not a RAID controller inside the machine, the RAID is done in software. And so that means if the machine loses power at an unexpected stage, Linux deals with that unclean shutdown by rewriting the parity disk on your RAID. So if you have RAID 5 and you have one drive that is dedicated for that, it will rewrite the drive when you reboot the drive that's used for parity. It's not exactly on a per drive parity basis, but it will recalculate the parity when you reboot, I guess is the most technically correct thing to say. JBOD, just a bunch of disks, and then you have no redundancy. But it's VMware certified. VMware ESXi 5.5, you can use this all day long. And when you call VMware for support and you're like, hey, I'm running this on a thing that I built, they're like, oh, sorry, sir, we're not going to help you. But this is VMware certified. And so it's a really inexpensive way to have your data store on something that's pretty high performance, especially when you factor in the 10 gig Ethernet performance. So it's actually pretty good. We're going to take a look at some detailed benchmarks. You'll find those on the website in terms of different kinds of workloads. Spoiler alert, those benchmarks is it actually did pretty well. It did actually better than I was expecting for the disk configuration and the relatively low amount of CPU power. Normally with a dual core and something like a Pentium, the SMB performance, that's the Windows share, that is always CPU bound and that's not multi-threaded. And so I think that's why they went with the 2.9 gigahertz CPU here, because it really suffers when it's one of the low power, like 1.9 gigahertz or 2.2 gigahertz CPUs. It actually performed really well with this thing. The best performance though was by far iSCSI. iSCSI on this actually worked really well. You could use SSDs with this, but I wouldn't recommend it. The IOPS were a little bit constrained. You can see more about that in the benchmarks on the website, but for physical disk performance, it actually worked really well. Let's take a look at the software overview. There is iTunes functionality, you know, shared folder, RAID management, the whole 9 yards. Now let's just go through from the beginning and set up some storage. So we'll look at the disk information. Yep, see some disks, RAID management, create. One thing that's kind of nice is when you mouse over this, it's showing you the physical position on the front. If you can imagine the front of the enclosure here, you know, those are the two bays that are underneath the LCD with the top slot there being blank. That's showing you physically where these disks are. Let's do RAID 5. Now you do have the option to encrypt. This is LVM encryption as far as I know, but that's nice. After this is rebooted, you know, you would have to supply the password in order to decrypt the volume. This could be good if you're looking for that type of a security feature. I can do ext3, ext4, BTRFS or XFS. Now I really like XFS, especially for file systems that have a lot of very small files. But in this case, I'm going to pick BTRFS, and that's because this update, I just applied a firmware update before I recorded this for you guys, and they, in the update, said that BTRFS snapshotting was supported. Now, one of the things that delayed the review on this is snapshot support wasn't there. It was buggy. They fixed that, thank goodness. So we've got our hello world share snapshot. You can take a snapshot. Snapshot successful. Or you can set a scheduled snapshot and automatically remove the oldest. And we'll do it, you know, weekly on whatever, or we'll do it, you know, daily at, you know, whatever, at, you know, 6 a.m. or whatever. And so it's like, yes, snapshots will automatically be taken according to this schedule. Okay. So now it's set a cron job, and it's going to snapshot that every day. So snapshots are really important for point-in-time backups and that sort of thing. I'm glad to see that on this device. And that's going to create our RAID array. Normally this is pretty quick. Yay! A paltry 2.7 terabytes. That's about right for 5 750 gig hard drives in RAID 5. You lose one disk's worth of space to parity. Although technically, the parity is spread across all of the disks. NAS stacking. Ooh. So this can use iSCSI to stack multiple devices together, I suppose. We didn't really have an opportunity to test that. So image mounting. This is kind of fun. You can, you know, if you've got USB 3 hard drives, it's got the 2 USB 3 ports, which is handy for external hard drives. You know, you get a couple of 3 terabyte external hard drives to use that for backup and mirroring and imaging and that sort of thing. That works pretty well. Share folders. These are the folders it creates by default. I'm going to add one. Let's just call this one Hello World. We'll make that public. And we're not going to give it a size limit. And that's probably fine. And enter some options. And this is sort of the kinds of things that you could do to expose some of the space, like as if it were a physical hard drive, that you lose some of the disadvantages of just having a shared folder on the network. This is basically dedicated to a specific virtual machine on your network. And if the physical hardware that is attached to that physical drive goes down, so like you're running a server that's running a VM and the storage is on this thing, but the hardware that's running the VM goes down, you could immediately boot up that hard drive as long as this NAS was still up. And that's some of the redundancy that you get with VMware. Now, in a SAN situation, you would have several of these boxes and they'd be mirrored. And so if you lost a SAN box, another SAN box would still have the storage and it would continue on. And so you get sort of high availability that way. That's probably too much to go into for this video, but you know that your VMware certified iSCSI whatnots, they're all there. Of course, it supports users and groups. It can do Active Directory integration, local users and groups. You can do batch import You can set up quotas for each individual user. LDAP support, which is another Active Directory is the proprietary extended embrace of LDAP. So know that that's there. There are network services. You can the Samba CIFS. You sometimes hear me referring to this as SMB. This is the Windows standard. AFP is the Apple File Protocol. NFS is the old Unix standard. But this works well if you're going to, let's say that you've got 3 or 4, web front ends, and you're going to store all of your websites on NFS. They can all mount NFS, and this is one of the more convenient ways that they can deal with that sort of shared file system. FTP, TFTP, there are some web services. You can, set up Apache, I guess, and you can install SSL for the GUI. Universal Plug and Play, Bonjour for the Apple side. You can enable SSH. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Should only be used in conjunction with an IT expert, and there may be a security risk associated with it. Yeah, don't enable SSH unless you know what you're doing. Let's take a deeper look at what's happening under the hood with SSH. So here's my handy dandy putty window. Hey, look at that. Please do not modify or delete any files or folders. This may result in abnormal system operation, but check it out. Linux, look at that. So cat proc md stat. Now, this is sort of the Linux view of what's going on with MD0, which is our RAID array. If we do mount, you can see MD0 is mounted on /RAID 0. It's not actually RAID 0. Of type BTRFS. And so this shows you what's going on sort of under the hood of your Thecus. Now, I mentioned earlier, if you lost power unexpectedly, you would see something different here when you do a cat /proc/md stat. So this is actually kind of a useful sort of basic toe in the water type command if you wanted to get one of these and you wanted to mess around with the command line, or if you're just using Linux software RAID, even nothing to do with anything Thecus, this command and this sort of knowledge of what's going on is still helpful. If the computer had been restarted unexpectedly, one of these U's would probably be an underscore, or could possibly be an underscore, and you may have a message here that there's a resync in progress, and then your hard drive would be noticeably busy. And that's because, again, there's not really a true proper hardware RAID controller or a battery backup unit to deal with unclean shutdowns. And so on every unclean shutdown, the speed of the machine is going to be reduced because it's waiting for that parity information to resync across the disks. It always rebuilds the parity information on an unclean shutdown. It has no choice but to do that because of the way that it works. Otherwise, you get into corruption issues. ZFS on FreeBSD is one of the few file systems that doesn't really suffer from that problem. It's a file system that's designed with multiple physical block devices in mind. So when you have an unclean shutdown, it's able to recover from that in a way that other file systems really can't. And the people that wrote MD sort of assume that the file system that you have is not designed with that in mind, and so at a block level it takes care of making sure that all the structures are synchronized, because it assumes that the file system couldn't deal with that, which is a correct assumption with ext3, ext4, xfs, btrfs. So yeah, there's that. All right, I've gotten way too off track, and all that's probably going to be edited out anyway. So let's go back over to this other stuff. So this can be a VPN client. Auto thumbnail is an option where if you've got the app for this thing and it's connected to the app, it'll automatically generate small thumbnails so that on your mobile device you're not downloading huge images to get a preview of them. Let's go to application server. So it's got iTunes. You can do, an iTunes server service on this thing right out of the box. It's also got app installation, so you can go and download. It's like, oh, let's go to the website and see what applications they have in the App Center. And so you can get the Plex Media Server, which we've talked about on other videos that we've done. And you can use local display. Now, local display is this thing that lets you use the VGA or HDMI, so you could have it hooked up to a television. I think that's an unusual use case for a 2U rack mount server, but Thecus has some other products that are perhaps a little bit more appropriate for the HDMI connection. But if you're, a small or medium business, and you're going to hook the NAS up to, a conference room television or up to a lobby television, you could totally do that. There are also Linux distributions here that you can run, or like Drupal and Python and SAB NZBD for downloading for I didn't say that. and YouTube apps and transmission, which is a BitTorrent thing. You can actually have the NAS be its own BitTorrent client. So you have a torrent file and you just copy it over to the NAS, and the NAS takes care of downloading it for you. Your computer doesn't even download it. So these are pretty standard features. It also has McAfee antivirus that's included, and I think that's actually kind of valuable in a Windows environment in a small business. We did some testing and it actually worked really well. The one thing that did not work was we wanted to see what would happen if CryptoLocker struck. And so CryptoLocker is a virus that encrypts your files. And so we put all kinds of files on the NAS, and then we infected a computer with CryptoLocker, and the NAS couldn't do anything about that. And really can't fault the NAS for that, because there's not executable code running on the NAS, and there's not really anything to disinfect on the NAS. And so CryptoLocker is just encrypting the contents of the NAS, but it looks like normal read-write operations, and so it's not really a fair ask the antivirus to say, hey, CryptoLocker is running, I should not let that workstation change those files on the NAS. But as far as other antivirus stuff goes, it actually worked pretty well, enabling the McAfee antivirus extension. So if somebody had an infected Word document or an infected executable, the antivirus daemon on this actually did a pretty good job clearing that. That's really only useful if you're on Windows. There's only a limited number of Mac OS viruses, and it didn't seem like the McAfee engine was all that keen on picking up any Mac OS malware, but we didn't test that specifically, so don't quote me on that. In terms of other features, it has backup features, which is nice. It'll do rsync backup, which is always really handy, but you can also back up to Amazon S3. So if you wanted to get Amazon S3 storage or the Glacier storage, you can do that directly on here. You can also burn to a USB, CD or DVD ROM. You could also do a USB copy. So if you get a huge USB 3 external hard drive, you can set that up so that it'll automatically copy this path to there. But SSH keys, no, none for you. I don't know why. Why would you not do that? It seems silly. Backup to a remote NAS. Custom backup, iSCSI backup. So you have some options in the GUI here, and you've got some options from the command line, but it's a little bit of an uphill battle if you really want to do the command line. So it also has temperature monitoring and fan monitoring, and it can email you in the event of bad things happening. One other cool feature it does have that I'll mention real quick with the whole SCSI RAID card shutdown thing is it does support shutdown with a supported uninterruptible power supply. So you need to do that. If you get one of these, you've got to get a battery backup. You've got to make sure the battery backup connects to the serial port, and then it will shut this thing down. You've got to do that. It also supports being a print server. So again, in a small, medium business, this thing's doing double duty, and you've got it connected to the, the lobby waiting room television. And it can also be a print server with USB printers, because, you're a small business and you couldn't get the network printer, you had to get a USB printer. So what's the verdict on this thing? Well, it has a lot of features. They put a lot of work into the custom Linux operating system on this thing. It's overall, it's a pretty good value. Look, let's face it. If you were to build a similar machine as this, if you were to go and get a 2U rack mount system, and you were to get a redundant power supply, and you were able to get a Pentium G850 and 4 gigs of RAM, you probably could build it a little bit cheaper. But they've got a pretty good setup here with their software. It's got a 2-year warranty, and it's VMware certified. Nothing you build is going to be VMware certified. The hardware is enterprise-ish. The motherboard looks like it's sort of a modified version of something that was intended to go into an appliance, so it's not exactly ATX, but it's pretty close, or micro ATX, I guess, in this case. But it's pretty close, and its disconnection, it has 5 SATA connections that go to a port multiplier so that you get the 8 SATA ports on the front, and that might be why they didn't go for a more dense configuration with 9 or 12 drives. The VMware certification is really what nails it for me, and that's just because I've had to deal with VMware support before, and they were real sticklers about having something that's VMware certified. So if you're a small business and you want to buy something that's not going to get you fired because it doesn't work, or because you have to deal with VMware support, this is VMware certified. There are other similar solutions that are VMware certified, but this is a pretty good value. You're not going to find it, but it also doesn't cost $100,000. So you got to keep that in mind too. Overall, it runs Linux. I like that it runs Linux. I wish that they had included more stuff for the command line gearheads. Now you can install it after the fact. There's nothing to stop you from doing that, and so it's not really that much of a hurdle. And I think you can get some of what you need from the app, the app store, the download and install app function that's built right into the device. But for things like SSH keys and stuff that are almost one step removed from BusyBox utilities, I would sort of expect to see that. But overall, it's not bad. And then you got to check out the website for the performance statistics. The performance statistics were, it performed about like you would expect. If you built a machine that had a 10 gig Ethernet adapter and a reasonably okay SATA controller, it is basically identical performance to that. This hardware is not, super special. It's not super optimized. It's not something that is totally and completely like customized or anything that's crazy. It's pretty standard out of the box stuff, but that also means it's well supported. So I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing. I would give this probably 3.5 out of 5 stars for the value. But I would say that it's probably 4 out of 5 stars for ease of use, and probably 4 out of 5 stars for construction and how well it's put together, and sort of how the choices that have been made in putting this thing together. I think they could have gotten a little bit more value out of it, a little bit better in terms of the value proposition, but overall it's pretty solid, and it's a VMware certified. So if you need VMware certification, go for it. Makes sense. That's been the Thecus N8810U-G. If you guys have any other questions, or you got one of these, or something like that, let us know. Post over in the forums. I'll be checking it out. All right, this is Wendell signing out.